November 3, 1980. Johnny Carson was in the middle of a light-hearted interview with Jack Lemmon when Lemmon said 7 words that stopped everything. "Johnny, I need to tell you something." What followed became the most emotional moment in Tonight Show history. The Tonight Show was running perfectly that Monday evening. Johnny Carson was interviewing Jack Lemmon, one of Hollywood's most beloved actors and a frequent guest on the show. 55 years old, Lemmon was at the height of his career, fresh off critical acclaim for films like The China Syndrome, and preparing to promote his upcoming comedy. The interview had started with all the warmth and humor that defined Johnny and Jack's friendship. They had known each other for years, and their on-screen chemistry was effortless. Jack was doing his famous impressions, telling behind-the-scenes stories about working with Billy Wilder and Walter Matthau, and the studio audience was eating it up. Johnny was in his element, setting up perfect straight lines for Jack's punchlines, and the show was running exactly as planned. But 12 minutes into the interview, something shifted in Jack Lemmon's demeanor that Johnny immediately noticed. Johnny had just asked Jack about his upcoming projects when Lemmon's smile faltered. The legendary actor, known for his impeccable comic timing and ability to switch between comedy and drama, suddenly looked vulnerable in a way the audience had never seen before. "Johnny," Jack said, his voice quieter than it had been moments before. "Before we talk about the new film, I need to tell you something, and I need to tell America something." The studio audience, sensing the shift in tone, grew quiet. Johnny leaned forward in his chair, his entertainer's instincts immediately recognizing that something important was about to happen. "Of course, Jack," Johnny said gently. "Whatever you need to say." Jack Lemmon took a deep breath, looked directly at the camera, then back at Johnny. "I went to the doctor last Tuesday for what I thought was just a routine checkup. I had been feeling tired, having some pain I couldn't quite explain. I figured it was just age, 55 years of living catching up with me." Johnny's face showed genuine concern. "What did they find, Jack?" "They found cancer," Lemmon said, the words coming out quietly but clearly. "Colon cancer stage 2. For a brief moment, Johnny Carson sat completely still, processing what he had just heard. Then without hesitation, he did something that demonstrated why he was more than just a talk show host. He became exactly the friend Jack needed in that moment. Johnny stood up from his desk, walked over to where Jack was sitting, and placed his hand on his friend's shoulder. The gesture was simple, but it spoke volumes. "Jack," Johnny said, his voice thick with emotion. "First of all, thank you for trusting us with this. I know that couldn't have been easy to say out loud, especially in front of millions of people. I wanted to say it here," Jack replied, "because this show has always felt like talking to friends, and I figured if I was going to tell people, I wanted to tell them somewhere that felt safe." Johnny returned to his seat, but the tone of the interview had completely transformed. The audience sat in respectful silence, understanding they were witnessing something far more important than entertainment. "Can you tell us what happens next?" Johnny asked. "If you're comfortable talking about it," Jack nodded. "I have surgery scheduled for next Monday. They're going to remove the tumor and check if it spread to the lymph nodes. The doctors are optimistic because they caught it relatively early, but there's no guarantee with cancer. There's never a guarantee." "Are you scared?" Johnny asked, displaying the kind of direct honesty that few interviewers would risk in such a moment. "Terrified," Jack admitted without hesitation. "I've played a lot of characters dealing with crisis, but this is real life and it's different when you're not acting. I have a wife, children, friends, people I'm not ready to leave yet, and there's still so much work I want to do." Johnny leaned forward, his famous quick wit completely set aside. "You're going to beat this, Jack. You're one of the strongest people I know, and you have the best medical care in the world. But I also want you to know that whatever you need, support, distraction, someone to talk to at 3:00 a.m. when you're worried, I'm here. We're all here." What happened next caught everyone off guard. An audience member, a middle-aged woman in the third row, raised her hand and called out to the stage. "Mr. Lemmon, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I need to ask you something." Security started to move toward her, but Johnny held up his hand to stop them. "It's okay," he said, "go ahead." "My husband was diagnosed with cancer 6 months ago," the woman said, her voice shaking. "And he's been so scared that he won't talk about it with anyone." "How did you find the courage to tell people? How do you deal with the fear?" Jack Lemmon looked at the woman with deep compassion. "You deal with it by not dealing with it alone," he said. "That's why I'm talking about it now. I spent the last 5 days keeping this secret, trying to be strong, trying to pretend everything was fine, and it was killing me almost as much as the cancer might. So I decided I wasn't going to hide anymore." Johnny made a decision in that moment that would change the rest of the show. He signaled to Fred to Cordova to extend the segment and asked the audience, "Is there anyone else here who's been affected by cancer, either personally or someone you love?" Nearly a quarter of the audience raised their hands. For the next 15 minutes, The Tonight Show became something it had never been before. A support group, a forum for honest conversation about fear and mortality, and a demonstration of what community could look like in the face of crisis. Johnny facilitated a conversation between Jack and several audience members who shared their stories. A young woman talked about losing her mother to breast cancer. An older man described his own successful battle with prostate cancer. A teenage girl asked Jack how to support her father who was going through chemotherapy. Jack Lemmon answered each question with honesty and compassion, sometimes through tears, sometimes with the gallows humor that people facing serious illness often develop. And Johnny Carson, the master of timing and comedy, knew exactly when to speak and when to simply let the moment breathe. "You know what I'm realizing as we talk about this? Jack said at one point, cancer doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care if you're rich or poor, famous or unknown, young or old. And that's terrifying, but it's also weirdly comforting because it means we're all in this together. As the segment drew to a close, Johnny made a promise to Jack Lemmon that he would keep for the rest of Lemmon's life. Jack, I want you to know that you're not going through this alone. Johnny said, I'm going to check in on you every week, not as a talk show host, but as your friend, and when you're ready, when you've beaten this thing, I want you back on the show to tell America how you did it. Jack smiled through his tears. It's a deal, Johnny, and thank you not just for letting me talk about this, but for showing people that it's okay to be scared and it's okay to ask for help. That's what friends are for, Johnny replied simply. The moment The Tonight Show ended, the NBC switchboard was flooded with calls. But unlike typical viewer responses, these weren't about entertainment or comedy. People were calling to share their own cancer stories, to thank Jack for his bravery, and to ask how they could support cancer research. The American Cancer Society reported receiving more calls in the 24 hours following that broadcast than they had in the entire previous month. People who had been hiding their diagnosis from family and friends found the courage to speak openly. Families who had been avoiding difficult conversations finally started talking. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, an oncologist at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, later said, "What Jack Lemmon did that night probably saved lives. Early detection is crucial for cancer treatment." And when he talked openly about his diagnosis on national television, thousands of people who had been putting off checkups suddenly made appointments. What viewers didn't see was the extent of Johnny Carson's private support for Jack Lemmon during his cancer treatment. True to his word, Johnny called Jack every week, sometimes more often. He visited Jack in the hospital after his surgery, bringing books and jokes and normally to sterile hospital rooms. When Jack went through chemotherapy and couldn't work, Johnny quietly made sure that Jack's family had everything they needed. When Jack felt strong enough for visitors but too weak to go out, Johnny would bring dinner to his house and they would watch old movies together. Johnny never made me feel like I was sick, Jack. 4 months later, in March 1981, Jack Lemmon returned to The Tonight Show. The surgery had been successful. The cancer had been caught before it spread significantly, and Jack was in remission. When Johnny introduced him, the studio audience gave Jack a standing ovation that lasted nearly 2 minutes. Jack walked onto the stage looking thinner but healthy, and the first thing he did was hug Johnny Carson. Well, Johnny said when they finally sat down, "You kept your promise." "I told you I'd beat it," Jack replied with his characteristic smile. "Though I'll admit, there were moments when I wasn't sure I would." "What got you through those moments?" Johnny asked. "Honestly, this conversation we had in November," Jack said, knowing that I had talked about it openly, that I had made a kind of promise to all those people watching to fight this thing. It gave me something to hold on to when things got scary. Jack also revealed something else during that return appearance: the number of letters he had received from people dealing with cancer and how those connections had helped him through his treatment. "I got thousands of letters," Jack said, "from people going through chemo, from families supporting loved ones with cancer, from survivors who wanted to share their stories. And reading those letters reminded me that I wasn't alone. None of us are alone." Jack Lemmon lived for another 21 years after that diagnosis, continuing to work and winning another Academy Award nomination. When he passed away in 2001, it was from complications related to bladder cancer, a different cancer that developed years later. But he always credited his successful battle with colon cancer to early detection and the support system that Conversation on The Tonight Show had helped create. In his autobiography published posthumously, Jack devoted an entire chapter to that November night on The Tonight Show. "Johnny Carson gave me permission to be vulnerable," Jack wrote. "In a world where men especially are taught to be strong and stoic, Johnny showed me and millions of others that there's strength in admitting you're scared. That conversation saved my life in more ways than one." The night Jack Lemmon revealed his cancer diagnosis on The Tonight Show became a watershed moment in how Americans talked about serious illness. Prior to that conversation, cancer was often discussed in whispers, if it was discussed at all. People hid their diagnosis, suffered in silence, and faced their fears alone. But Jack's openness, combined with Johnny's compassionate response, helped begin changing that culture. Other celebrities started talking more openly about their health challenges. Families found it easier to have difficult conversations, and the stigma that had surrounded cancer began slowly to diminish. Cancer support organizations credit that Tonight Show episode as a turning point in public awareness and fundraising. The visibility that Jack brought to the disease, and the normalcy with which Johnny treated the conversation, made cancer something that could be discussed openly rather than hidden in shame. Years later, when asked about the most important moment of his Tonight Show career, Johnny Carson always mentioned Jack Lemmon's cancer revelation. "I did thousands of interviews over 30 years, Johnny said in a 1999 interview. "I talked to presidents and movie stars and comedians, and everyone in between. But the most important conversation I ever had was with Jack that November night, because it wasn't about entertainment. It was about life and death and friendship and courage." Today, when oncologists and cancer counselors train people in how to support loved ones with cancer diagnoses, they often use footage from that Tonight Show episode as an example of what compassionate support looks like. Letting someone be vulnerable, asking honest questions, creating space for authentic emotion, and simply being present for someone who's scared. Johnny Carson stopped The Tonight Show that night not because something went wrong, but because something deeply right was happening. A friend needed support, and he provided it. In doing so, he showed millions of Americans that the most important thing we can do for people facing serious illness is simply be there for them with honesty, compassion, and unwavering friendship. If this incredible story of courage and friendship moved you, make sure to subscribe for more true stories about the moments when television became a force for good. Share this video with someone facing health challenges and let them know they're not alone. And if you've been putting off that doctor's appointment, let Jack Lemmon's story inspire you to take care of yourself.